Okay, excellent. We get to go to our long-term colleagues here at the Border Patrol. Vinny, so we should have two agents on, Vinny and Jeff, who have graciously offered us their Saturday mornings. Thank you to you both. Chris Ann has been our primary contact over the last year or so. She recently moved out of this role, and so I'm actually meeting Vinny and Jeff for the first time. So thank you for jumping in. We chatted a bit ahead of time to give some context. Just to circle back to that, so you both are aware, this is a collective of Episcopalians from all over the world, primarily US and Mexico and Central America, who are spending a couple days talking about borders, and specifically what is our role as followers of Jesus to engage in borderlands, whether it's here at this border or any border that divides us as followers of Jesus who are working towards peace. And so to do that well, we want to hear perspectives. We want to hear perspectives from those on all sorts of different sides of this. So welcome. Can you hear me? And can you unmute yourself so we can hear from you? And then I'll ask you a few questions before you jump in.
Good morning. Can you hear us?
All right.
All right.
Good to see you both. Thank you. Okay, yeah, if we could just open up by hearing you two interact with, obviously, what's a bit of your story that led to you choosing to become a Border Patrol agent? And what's the work that the Border Patrol does? Just give us some context for what the Border Patrol does specifically here in San Diego, Tijuana, and then we'll go into Q&A from there.
Okay, perfect. So I'll start. I became a Border Patrol agent. I became a Border Patrol agent because my ex-wife's uncle, he was a Border Patrol agent, and I knew nothing about the Border Patrol. I came from New York City, so I was actually going to be a NYPD officer, but I met my ex-wife, and so when I was here with her, she was like, I don't want to move to New York. So I was like, all right, I got to start looking at different law enforcement options. And I spoke to her uncle, who was a supervisory Border Patrol agent out of the Imperial Beach Station. So he told me about the job because I knew nothing at all. I knew I was a city boy growing up. I didn't know anything about the mountains in the desert or anything like that. So I was like, you know what, I'll give it a shot. And so I did give it a shot, and I do love my job now that I do. It is part of law enforcement. But I'll give you a little background about me. After high school, I graduated high school and I went into the Navy. I was a Master at Arms. I did 2 tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was stationed on the USS Nimitz CVN 68. After my military time, I became...
I'm not having any trouble seeing them. It must be local to you.
Oh, sorry. I'll keep going. Anyway, so...
Yeah, sorry, Vinny. I think you're good to go.
Okay, perfect. So after the military, I joined a security firm, and I was working for a pharmaceutical company. After that, I was going to school, and then this is where I started applying for different law enforcement agencies. Got my bachelor's degree in business management from the University of Phoenix, and I started my career in Casa Grande, Arizona. So I was in the desert, completely opposite from New York City. And after that, I became an Explorer advisor. So I work with the youth. As I was growing up, I love working with kids. It's because we give them a pathway not to just be a Border Patrol agent, but to do anything in life. We give them communication skills. We give them just a pathway to what they want to do in their future. After that, I got stationed here because my son was living in San Diego and I was in Arizona. So I got a transfer. And when I got a transfer, I came to the San Diego sector, the Brownfield station. And in the Brownfield station, I became an EMT, emergency medical technician. My other collateral duties that I do have, I was a public affairs officer. With Jeff is actually our public affairs officer supervisor, and he's also the Border Community Liaison agent supervisor. So I love the office so much that I actually came back into the office to be a Border Community Liaison agent. I think I like more working with the community than working with the media, because then I can actually give, I can talk to people, I can go out to everybody and maybe give them a different aspect of what they do think of Border Patrol. But right now I am the Border Community Liaison agent. I took over for Chris Ann. It's going to be some hard shoes to fill, but I'll try my best. So I'll pass you over to my supervisor, Jeff.
Oh, I'm Jeff Stevenson. I've been in the Border Patrol for about 14 years. Grew up in Southern California, so I'm pretty much home. Grew up here my whole life. And when I was, 18, I got married, had kids. And, when I was that age, I kind of had two paths I was looking at, was either law school or law enforcement. And being that young with kids at home, law school wasn't really looking like a great financial decision and option. So I started applying with different law enforcement agencies. And surprisingly, it was kind of difficult to get into some of them. But when I was 23, wasn't my first choice, but I'm actually really glad that I ended up with the Border Patrol. It's a great agency, it's a great career, and working with the federal government's been great for my family and I. So it's been a good ride. I started working in public affairs last August. As Vinny said, I oversee public, like the media element of it, but also the community relations. So anything kind of external for San Diego sector, I typically have a hand in it. There's a lot going on. Chris Ann was, she actually promoted, so she's a supervisor back at, and actually myself, Vinny and Chris Ann, we're all from the same station here in San Diego. So even when we're not doing the public affairs stuff, we still know each other pretty well and interact back at the station. So she was actually able to promote at the same station, so we're happy for her. And she's just always did a great job. And I'm glad that we have the relationship built with you guys. So, and happy to be here.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And we know that these opportunities, for those of us listening in from really around the globe, the opportunity to actually meet face to face as much as we can in light of COVID is a great gift, because there's so many things said about Border Patrol or said about immigration and our policies. To actually sit with, hear from, learn from, get that ground zero perspective is something that it really closes our gap, our empathy gap, our understanding gap of how we view borders. And so thank you for this time. Would you guys, either one of you, just walk us through, what's the day-to-day enforcement look like in San Diego, Tijuana? And a follow-up question would be, what's the typical, what's the everyday process of when someone tries to cross illegally, the arrest? We hear about the process of detention centers. There's been tons of talk, obviously, about how we're treating families and minors when they come with adults. But if you just give us a day-to-day and then kind of zero into what's an anecdotal story of what it looks like when enforcement is being done.
So I'm going to start from the beginning. CBP has three different, think of it as an umbrella. You got CBP, and then after that you have Border Patrol, Office of Field Operations, and Air and Marine Operations, which is AMO. We are Border Patrol. So anybody who has ever, taken a flight out of the country, or maybe they walked over to Tijuana and came back, they're going to meet OFO, which is, people refer to them as customs, but they're called Office of Field Operation. And you're going to present yourself for inspection when you come in. And if you don't have the proper documentation to come into the United States, you're going to be turned away. So where Border Patrol comes into play is anybody who tries to circumvent the port of entry, and they go between the ports of entry, that's where we come into play. So as they cross over, and we'll apprehend them, and we'll ask them if they have documentation. We'll let them know, hey, U.S. Border Patrol, do you have any documentation to be here or in the U.S. legally? And if they don't have documentation, that's when we apprehend them. We take them back to our Border Patrol station, a local Border Patrol station, depending on the area we're in. If you're in Chula Vista, it would be Chula Vista Border Patrol Station. And at Chula Vista Border Patrol Station, we will start inputting them. We'll get their information. We'll run their fingerprints, make sure that they're not terrorists, or they're not, people are not looking for a violent felon or anything, or maybe they're past, they've killed somebody. All those things come up, or sex offenders. So after we do that, and that will determine if they're going to go. So if it's like their first time, it's a misdemeanor. If they've done it again and they were previously deported, it becomes a felony. It can be charged as a felony. And depending on if they're a violent felon, on top of that, if we do catch them, all charges could be different. So, I mean, I think maybe Jeff can go in a little bit more.
So, yeah, I mean, like Minnie said, once somebody's apprehended, and this is, we're kind of speaking on normal terms right now with COVID, there's some different processes. There's Title 42 statutes, and that's kind of like the abnormal thing. But at the end of the day, it still looks very similar, right? Because we arrest people, we process them, we take their biometrics, their fingerprints, and then they continue in the process, either maybe asylum seeker, or whether they're a felon of some sort or wanted, whatever the case may be, or they're just a regular, say somebody from Mexico that's just looking for work, right? They may be back in Mexico the same day. So it just depends. Each person, each instance is a wholly different case. And our job is simply to interdict things and people coming across the border illegally, right? So it could be people, drugs, could be terrorists, could be anything. We just stopped somebody today on the freeway that said they had a bomb in their car just randomly. And so we have to deal with these things on vehicle stops all along the border area. And that includes pretty much all of San Diego County, but primarily we're focused for our sector down fairly close to the border. And then, so once we interdict, then we process them and then we move them along. But there's a lot of different agencies involved after we've done the initial processing, kind of like the initial determination. Okay, is this person seeking asylum? Is this person wanted? Are they a felon? Then we kind of hand it off to another agency. You know, if they're seeking asylum, we might hand it off to USCIS, which is Citizenship and Immigration Services. We might hand it off to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which handles long-term detention and other things like that. We might, if somebody's an unaccompanied juvenile, we might hand it to Health and Human Services, and where they're going to find them a shelter or a foster home. So we are just the first step in a long chain of different agencies. Unfortunately, we kind of take the brunt of the blame and kind of the brunt of the negative perceptions, because we are the first line. We are the first people that everyone encounters, and we're encountering people at the worst part of their process usually, right? Like they're desperate, they're out in the mountains, but that also means that we're there when they're at their greatest time of need. We encounter people almost every day on the border that need to be rescued, that are running out of water, especially when you get out into the desert in Arizona. And we have people that have been assaulted out on the border. The smugglers, I mean, people don't realize that everybody coming across the border illegally is being moved by a criminal organization. You can theoretically, but at great risk. You can't come across the border illegally without encountering or dealing with a criminal organization. They control the borders. They're 100% controlled from Mexico. So the idea that people are just crossing and they're just asylum seekers, that may be true for them, but there's a criminal organization that's involved, and those criminal organizations exploit and manipulate these people. They're the ones that make them move and cross out the deserts and you know, instead of at the ports of entry. They're the ones that are kind of controlling what's happening. And I mean, we could go into a whole discussion about that and how they use that to move narcotics and move other groups, move violent people, move wanted criminals. So while we're dealing with a group of 50 or 60 family and women and children, you know, a mile down the road, there's a group of 30, you know, people crossing that don't want to get caught, right? We don't know who they are, and we can't, our resources get stretched very thin, right? We're dealing with these families and they're moving narcotics and fentanyl and heroin and cocaine over here, but it's coordinated. They're doing it on purpose. They know what's happening, they know what they're doing, and we've proven it. We've seen it. We've seen how they, as soon as during the worst of things, as soon as we would see our detention capabilities start to decrease, where we were able to move people out of our facilities, which aren't equipped or designed to handle families and everything, as soon as we start moving people out and have our numbers decrease, all of a sudden, boom, we'd start seeing a huge influx on the border, and the organization would start to move people, and they'd fill us back up because they knew that would pull resources away from doing other enforcement activity and stopping all these drugs and stuff. So make no mistake, it's all very tied, coordinated. And so wrap it all up, as Border Patrol agents, we have to deal with all of it, whether it's the little 5-year-old kid that's down by the river by themselves with no family, no parent, and have a phone number written on their arm, which I've seen personally, right? To the violent drug smuggler who is shooting at us. And we have to deal and make these decisions and deal with all these situations on a day-to-day basis. And depending on where you're at along the border, it can vary on degree of, like, you know, what you're going to see.
Would you all, thank you for that. That's really helpful. Even interacting with you two here, it's clear that we get to hear a bit of your backstory, a bit of what brings you to this work, hearing some of your heart, to whatever degree you're able to. I know your badges are on and your uniforms are on, and we respect that. To what degree, or how do you navigate being a human being with empathy in that moment of looking in the eye of someone who is in that moment of need, is vulnerable, but also potential threat, and the way you have to enforce the policies and the laws of the land? Tell us about that tension, or moments maybe you found yourself in that tension.
I think it comes as experience of being an agent. I've had these issues. Sometimes you'll think you'll come up on scene and maybe you feel everything is good on the scene and things can turn like in a blink of an eye. But like you said, it's empathy. I remember I was in Arizona and I had two girls walk up to me. I was on what we call an X, is where you're at a stationary position for most of your shift, maybe 6 to 8 hours.
Still watch
Yes,
position.
still watch. So they walked up to me, and I remember this day. I think one girl was 18 and one was 14. It was her and her sister. They said they were scared to come to Border Patrol because the smugglers told them that we were bad, do not go to them. But they were like, we had no option, so we just came to you. And I was like, oh, I feel, I told them I feel so bad. I was like, they do this all the time. They'll leave you in the middle of nowhere in the desert. And in the desert, it's a 90-mile walk where I was at in Casa Grande. Almost 90 miles. They were maybe 12 miles from the border. And so they came up to me, I talked to them, and I have food in my vehicle. I gave them my food. And that's the empathetic part. But like you said, I have to be on alert. Could that be a setup? But I'm not going to change who I am as a person. It's a fine line that when I do encounter somebody, is how to be still, how I can enforce something and show off some presence versus being empathy with everybody and they take advantage of me and then beat me up, kill me, and take my gun. So it's actually very hard, but I'm a good person regardless. And I know everybody is just people. So we got to treat them what they are. They're people. So treat everybody with respect.
I think Vinny hit it on the head. I mean, we can still enforce the laws. We've sworn an oath to enforce the laws enacted by Congress, right? And that's what we do. And the validity of those laws can, get played out in the courts and whatever, and they change. But our job is to enforce the law, and we can do that, and we do it with exceptional empathy. And most of us have kids, have families. We treat everyone we encounter with respect and dignity. Now, that's not to say that there's not bad apples out there. Just like any other agency, there's 20,000 Border Patrol agents. So yeah, there's some that aren't the nicest people maybe, but that's not the typical agent. The typical agent is the one that's going to give his own food and his own water to the person who's desperate, the person who's going to go out and bring toys from their kid's toy box and bring them into the detention area for the children. That's what I see. That's what I experience. And that's what I've been a party to. I've carried children out of canyons because they couldn't walk anymore and carried them on my own back. I mean, that's what we do. Now, yes, we enforce the law. Yes, we do get in use of force situations, and we do get in, shootings, and these things happen. Yeah, but that's part of the job, and it's no different than like a cop on the street, right? They're going to enforce the law, however they kind of feel about it or whatever. And laws, as you see, laws change, right? You got drug laws, marijuana laws have changed over the years, right? So you see laws shift and change, and it's no different with us. And as long as we're gonna do our job and enforce the law as written, and do it with empathy and dignity and respect, and treat those we encounter that way, just like I said, just like a local law enforcement would.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And all of you dropping questions in chat, I just want to let you know I see them, and I'll probably be kind of integrating them into a shorter set of questions, but they're great. Keep them coming. There is, as you all are very aware, and I'm sure it's central to your job in the social community relations side of things, there's perspective that the Border Patrol is enacting inhumane policies at times, especially in the last 4 years in this administration, the way that it's communicated about what's happening. And there's people that are on this call who are on the other side, who are dealing with the repercussions of those bad apples, as you said, at the detention centers, in migrant shelters, who have experienced the pain of broken systems that are having to be enacted by by your colleagues. How would you interact with that? Give us some insight into how you navigate some of that perspective that the Border Patrol is enacting inhumane policy.
So you got to remember, so we are an agency of the executive branch, right? So we don't necessarily create the policies. Our job is to enact or to follow the policy, right? So if the policy is valid, and it's, the courts are saying, yeah, good. And we see this, sometimes the policy will go, we're like, okay, we'll start doing this. The courts say, no, can't do that. And so we stop, right? And this is part of being a government entity. We as agents don't get to like choose and decide what policies we're going to enact, right? And so, yeah, they may be viewed inhumane, but the reality, again, on the ground, it looks a lot different. And I think that a lot of those are just perceptions, right? It's what you choose to kind of see in it. And to us, we're looking at it, well, like, these are, again, these are laws, and we enforce rule of law. And if people are crossing the border illegally, well, they chose to do that. The families chose to come here. We know they're desperate, and we get it. So we get that piece where people are desperate and they want, economic help, they want safety, they want all these things, but the laws are what they are. So it's like, it's kind of the age-old argument. If somebody steals because they're hungry and they steal food, is that right or wrong? Well, they still theft, they still stole, but they're hungry. So does anybody feel like, is anybody blame them? No, of course not. Nobody blames them. Nobody's like, oh, I can't believe they did that, how horrible. But it's like, well, should they still be punished for stealing? These are really like large ethical questions. So it just depends on where you're looking from, is where you're going to find your kind of values and your answers. And as far as the politics go of it, we're an apolitical agency. We can't really get into the politics of it. They are what they are. And we, unfortunately, our job becomes very political. But bear in mind, Border Patrol has been around since 1924. We've been doing this job for a long time. And a lot of the aspects of it have not changed. We've always enforced immigration laws. We've always, back in the 1920s, it was prohibition. We were primarily on the northern border then. And then, it shifted down to deal with immigration. Now, we deal with immigration, narcotics, terrorism. So we adjust based on the policies that are enacted at the executive branch and upheld by the courts, and the laws that are passed by Congress. And it's kind of simple as that. And we don't really get into the minutia of it because it's not up to us what those decisions always, right? If that makes sense. And we do our best to enact, to carry out the policies, the constitutional policies, as humanely as with as much empathy as we're able. And whether we really agree with what's happening, whether we really like it, it's not personal. It's not about that. Because I can go home at the end of the day and be like, I don't really like that. And then guess what I do? I go out and vote. I go out and get active. I talk to people, right? Like as a citizen, not as a Border Patrol agent, right? So I can do those things if I see something that I don't like or don't agree with. But as an agent, I do my job, and I do it with the best, the highest level of, like I said, with dignity and respect, and treating people as human beings. And we do everything we can to make sure that people have what they need, when they need it, that they're handled, passed on to the next agency, and that their cases are handled. And especially the supervisors, this is what I see all the time. Agents are like, hey, this person's been here too long. We need to get them moving. We need this. And you have to remember, sometimes we're trying to get somebody transferred, like out of our custody, for example, because we're meant to hold people for very short periods. And that's our goal, is to hold people in our facilities for the absolute minimum amount of time as possible. But then we're waiting on bed space in another facility, or we're waiting on Health and Human Services to provide a home for a kid so that they can go and be in a shelter or whatever. So until they say that they can take this person, this kid, we're stuck with them. And it's like people, and then again, that's where we become like the bad guys. And oh, this person was in your facility for 4 days, and we're like, we would have preferred they were in our facility for 4 hours, but we can't just send a kid out on the street. We have nobody to turn them over to. So what are we supposed to do? And we're at the mercy of other entities and other agencies often. And so, I don't know, that's kind of a long answer, but that's kind of, we do the best we can, really.
Yeah, for the most, our laws haven't changed, really. I mean, anybody that crosses illegally, that's what Border Patrol is there for. They're going to apprehend whoever they have in front of them. take them back to the Border Patrol station, process them, and either deport or turn them over to ICE or HHS, like Jeff said. But for the most part, our job hasn't changed since the 1920s. I mean, we're here to stop people crossing illegally and drugs, or in the 20s, it was alcohol.
Yeah, I hear that, and I also know that those of us listening in who are privy to what's happening here in proximity to it, we immediately think, oh, well, what about the exception? Is the exception then zero tolerance, where that's being enacted? I know different pieces of that have been enacted for a long time, and then there's an outcry, and the president pulls back on it, and Sessions is down here, obviously articulating it early on, and I'm talking with Chief Scott about that in real time. But so I hear what you're saying, and also I feel like there have been moments, especially in recent years, where it's not fair to just say, no, it's been the same forever and we're enacting the same laws of people that cross. There's some nuance to that. And that's some of the questions that, there's some intention behind my questions there. Let me ask this of you all. There's been a few in the chat thread about what does it look like to collaborate with DHS and their focus on civil liberties, civil rights. I know for me, something that's been significant as a local here in San Diego, as a faith leader, Chief Scott would have us and other immigration activists actually come sit with him every quarter, just to create relational equity, to hear from him directly what is going on behind enforcement, how he can hear from the perspective of the migrant community, of a faith community, and how we can just not allow some of these issues to get between our relationships, because clarity is always going to be better. Even if we disagree on things, like disagreement, that's fine. Of course, we're not all going to agree on everything, but we can still move forward together. How are you seeing Border Patrol, whether it's locally or nationally, listen in, collaborate with other organizations, other departments that may push back, but you're actually creating some relational equity?
Since I'm a Border Community Liaison agent right now, we always do things like this. I mean, we're sitting down with you guys right now today on this Saturday, but I am a community liaison agent, so I do go out to the field. I do go to different churches. I work with different advocacy groups, the Border Angels, all of these different groups we do work with. We try to build that relationship. We want to show you that everything that you see in the media is not always true. Come speak to us. We can understand some stuff that might affect somebody, but we're not these big bad agency that we hate people. We don't want to see people coming over here. I guess our big thing is that when they do come over here, is that there is a legal way. I think Rodney used to say it right all the time, that you're in your house, right? How do you want somebody to come in? You have your window open and you're upstairs in your house. You want them to come in through that window or knock on your door, because you don't know who they are when they're coming in. So all these things are good points, that there's a certain way to do things. That's the biggest thing.
So we do, as Vinny was saying, we do a ton of outreach in San Diego, and it kind of goes in waves depending on our enforcement posture, and depending on how, like, if we get really busy down on the border, unfortunately, sometimes our community relations tends to suffer. To me, I think it's one of the most important things we do is building bonds and coalitions with community stakeholders and working with people in the community, because I think creating a positive public perception is huge. Now, we unfortunately fight against things that are going on nationally and things that are completely out of our control, right? We can't control what the president says. We can't control what the U.S. attorney does. There's a lot of things we can't control. The Justice Department, they enact certain policies that are lawful policies, and our job just to kind of carry them out. But I can give you an example. Not too long ago, we had several doctors, and they were wanting to give flu shots to people in our facilities, right? Which at face value, it's like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I personally, I'm like, yeah, that's not a horrible idea. But problem is, that's not a decision that we can make locally. That's not something we have the ability to just say, oh yeah, come on in and give these people flu shots. And then there's whole other complications going with that, with administering a vaccine program, giving people shots, and you have to monitor them. And again, we're a short-term holding facility. We're not a jail, or our stations are like a local police station. They're not meant to hold people long-term. So giving somebody a vaccine or a flu shot and having to monitor them or have to be able to follow up with them is not always wouldn't necessarily be something we could do. So, but again, the point was, it's not something we could enact or do locally. We could just open the doors. It wasn't going to happen. But I mean, they came down, they protested at the sector headquarters and everything. We brought them in for a meeting. We had them all in a meeting with the chief. I was in on the meeting, and we listened, and we talked to them, and we listened to their concerns, and we listened to what they wanted to do, and they offered, and we said, look, it's not whether we agree or disagree with what you're saying. You just need to understand that it's not within our power to say yes. However, we wanted to hear your concerns and get you the opportunity to speak with the highest people in charge in San Diego, and we will push what you're saying up, and the powers that are, basically would go down to the DHS secretary would have to, sign off on and implement a program. And with anything in the government, it would have to be coordinated, because we're open to lawsuits and liability. We can't just do things like this. It doesn't work that way. So, so my point is that we want to listen. We want to hear from the community. We want to hear from people, but it is important to us that we do it, and like you said, in a very constructive and civil way, right? It's okay that we disagree, and we understand that people are going to disagree with our agency, with what we do, with our authority. Hey, that's fine. And again, that can change. Congress can change our authorities, what we do, our job, and cool, fine. It's not. We don't decide that. It's really important to us to have that civil and conversation, and versus some people choose to go out and do it in a kind of an uncivil manner, or get destructive, or especially concerning is people that act out against police, not just Border Patrol, but violence against police. People talking about attacking law enforcement is very concerning, and so those kind of activities are we do not condone. And yeah, that's unacceptable.
Thank you. I want a few questions have come in about, like, what's some of the in all of this. There's got to be, as we mentioned earlier, some of the struggle and the dissonance between being a personal human being and empathy, and then enforcing laws, whether you agree with them or not. What's some of the biggest challenges of being an agent, and does the agency offer you, what kind of support does it offer you emotionally? Is there trainings, or is there counseling, or how do you sustain in the midst of having to make such hard decisions that could create that dissonance? And then I'll go back into the chat thread, everyone, and we'll hit a few of these towards the end.
Okay, I'll start with the support. Border Patrol supports us we have an employee assistance program, and we do yearly or quarterly virtual learning center, where we do our VLCs. It's like they go over certain different topics, whether it be depression, anxiety, or something that you're dealing with, and how to reach out. Like, we have the EAP's assistance at any time. So if, say for instance, I call up that number and I say, I'm not feeling good, what's going on? You have a private person that will talk to you. I mean, your conversation will be private with that person. It's an actual counselor, and they will refer you to see somebody that's out in town. You can pick one of the counselors, and they will help you through whatever problems you have. Border Patrol is very supportive in that sense, because I can tell you recently, when I was doing, because I'm an EMT as well, we went, who was it? It was one of the departments. I forgot the department. I think it might have been probation or somebody, where they didn't have kind of like an employee assistance program. It might have been the fire department. And I was like, wow, Border Patrol has all this stuff, all these options if something happens. So we're proud about that. And the other question was, real quick, I'll go over that one. The first question, real quick.
Just what are some of the biggest struggles you have, and then how are you supported in that? But I think
I think one of the biggest struggles that we do have as Border Patrol agents is that sometimes we are stretched thin. That right now, I mean, in San Diego sector, like you said, when we're putting all these resources, I remember when I was in about a year ago, when all the family units were coming in, there was nobody on the border, and we don't know exactly what was coming in during those times. I remember I had a media person with me, one of the local news agencies. We were driving out there to do an interview, and as we were driving out, I didn't see one agent for miles. And that was because of the time when all the family units are coming in. So I think sometimes that can be a struggle. And I think perception is the biggest one right now. Our struggles that sometimes we're like these big bad, some terrible people and stuff like that. Sometimes I don't even want to wear my uniform out in town, as I'm coming home, because people have this perception about us that they hate us. And I don't like that. I'm a good person. I've always been a good person. I know many agents are the same. Like Jeff said, there are some bad people, but that happens in every agency. Any place you work at, you're going to find that happen. So I think that perception is good. And right now, to be able to talk to you guys like this and just to go out in our community and actually build relationships with them is awesome.
So I'll add a little bit. In addition to what he mentioned, the employee assistance program, we also have a pretty robust chaplaincy program. A lot of our agents are certified chaplains and represent different denominations, and including non-denominational chaplains. And we also have what's called a peer support program. And these are agents that have volunteered to be support for fellow agents. And it's a confidential program where agents talk to other agents and get one-on-one peer support. So, and Vinny mentioned some of our training. Every year, agents have to go through quite a bit of training. Everything, there's a lot of statutory training and stuff, but we have training on recognizing human trafficking and victimization. And so recognizing people that are vulnerable and a lot of things like that. And so we do those. And then also for self-care, we have like suicide awareness training, and we have training to recognize signs, not only in others, but in yourself, of like depression, suicide. And so it's very important to our agency to not only take care of the people that we're encountering, but ourselves. And then personally, as far as the one thing that I think is hardest for me is obviously two things. One is being painted kind of with a broad brush, and like, oh, every Border Patrol agent is a bad guy because how could you be a good person and enforce these laws? But it's because people don't see what it's really happening and all the good work we do and how kind-hearted and like what's really happening out there. They don't see it, but I see it. I'm like, it seems like we do a pretty good job. And there's times when it's not easy, but you have to remember that there's a bigger picture. It's not like these, people want to look at it at this one singular level and these singular incidents, but there's a huge overarching picture of immigration and movement of people and everything that I think kind of gets overshadowed, and they want to pick out little incidents of little of happenings. And then the other thing is when I see like kids in vulnerable places. I've seen, as I mentioned, like little kids 5 years old or under by themselves out in the middle of nowhere and in dangerous situations, and that really bothers me, seeing that, not only because just the inherent nature of it, but because I know that a lot of times it's their own parents, and whether you can have a perspective, it's desperation, whatever it is. A lot of times the parents, and I've seen it happen, will send the kid like, oh, just go over there and walk over there, and the parents will send the kids by themselves because they don't want to get caught themselves, or whatever the reason is, or the smugglers are manipulating the parents or exploiting. And it's really hard to see that and see that happening, and it pulls your heartstrings. I mean, I hate seeing kids put in those positions. I think we all do. So because they're totally vulnerable and have no control, little kids.
Let me ask one more question, and all of you listening in the chat, we just have a few more minutes left here with these agents. So if you could drop in something that you've learned, something that's been constructive for your perspective of their work and of border enforcement. I want to remind you that Dulce Garcia of Border Angels will be on here next, and she's gonna be able to answer a lot of the other questions you've had on here. She's wonderful. Oftentimes, before COVID, we would actually meet together, Border Patrol agents with Dulce side by side at Friendship Park, because it's such a dynamic conversation. Again, not necessarily about agreement, but about voicing our perspectives so we can learn and become more whole in our understanding of this borderlands. So keep that in mind. To you guys, we're in COVID moment, and what are you seeing on the ground right now? Are you seeing less people trying to cross? That's question one. Two, we know that those seeking asylum, which is central to our democracy and our Constitution, has been compromised because of COVID and because of some policy. Help us understand, seeking asylum is different than crossing the border illegally to smuggle drugs. And I know you guys have to discern that. But right now, as I understand it, asylum is not even an opportunity. So what's border crossings like right now? How are you dealing with asylum?
So right now, border crossings are, I think, about the same as last year, which we did have a lot of family reunions last year, right?
Yeah.
But they're actually, to me, it's been busy because I came from the Brownfield station. I can tell you from working on the ground, Brownfield was probably the busiest it's been in years. And Chula Vista and Brownfield are probably two of the busiest stations right now. What you said with the asylum seekers right now,
So we can address that a little bit. So with the asylum, it's not that asylum is ended. So what it is that there's certain elements, and I can't get into it too much just because it really, one, there's a lot of litigation and stuff, but people can still seek asylum. It's just not the same way maybe. So there's the something called the Convention on Torture, and I can't remember the whole name of it, but essentially if somebody says, in essence, and then they're seeking asylum because they're afraid they'll be tortured and persecuted for certain things if they return to their country, then that is a process, and that has not changed and has not ended, right? So, but what the difference is what the policy is right now is statutes under Title 42 of a CDC order, and it allows for the quick expulsion of people back to where the country they came from, essentially. So it's not normally Border Patrol, we enforce Title 8 of the US Code, right? So Title 8 is immigration related. So that's like illegal entry, illegal re-entry after deportation, all those things. So we're not, in most instances, we still enforce Title 8, doesn't stop, but in most instances, with most people crossing the border, we are encountering them and we are expelling them under Title 42 authority, with direction from CDC, and because it's essentially it's a health crisis as decided by the executive, right? So that's what's happening. So it's not that the asylum ended, it's just that what was happening before where people were like, I'm just scared to go back home because of the gangs. Well, that's not a valid, that wouldn't be a valid reason to stay. So it's not the same kind, it's hard to get into because we don't really adjudicate asylum cases. This is, again, we're just the first piece. We encounter people. Right now, our job is to encounter them, and if they don't claim fear of torture or anything, and there's no evidence or anything like that, we expel them right back to Mexico. And a majority, or Mexico, or to the country they came from. Sometimes people from other countries may go back to Mexico, but that gets getting into a whole, depending on every case being a little different, right? But what we're seeing on the border is a lot more people crossing. But they're primarily versus what we had in the past couple of years, we had families and kids. We're seeing predominantly single males, predominantly single adults, predominantly males, excuse me, and mostly Mexicans is what we're seeing crossing the border, at least here in San Diego, is what we're seeing a lot of, and more. And actually, because of the Title 42 authority and the way that people are being expelled quickly, most people we encounter them, and within an hour or two, they're back in Mexico. What's happening is they're crossing again very quickly. And so our numbers are kind of misleading because there's a high recidivism rate. It's like over 10% recidivism rate. So people are going back to Mexico, they're crossing right again. So every time we encounter them, that's another apprehension. So, our apprehensions last year were over 50,000, or this year for FY20, which ended September 31st. Yeah, so our numbers were just a little bit lower than last year, but like I said, a very high recidivism rate, and we're seeing it continue to increase, and will likely continue to be happening because if there's no Title 42, there's no real consequence. You're not formally deported. You're not. That's not a formal removal. It's just expulsion. We're just trying to we don't want to bring people into the facility. We don't want to have them in custody because we don't know whether they're sick or having COVID. We don't want to put them, our agents, or anybody in jeopardy. So we're trying to keep people out of our custody.
All right, we gotta wrap up, but I want to thank you again, both Vinny and Jeff, and for your time in this conversation. We receive it as a gift and as an opportunity to expand our perspective. So you guys are welcome to jump off. I'm going to hand it back to Bishop Susan, who will then introduce Dulce.
Thank you.